Code Explain says hi. So for today we're going to add Firebase to our React app. So this is the time to get some data from our database on Firebase and show it to the user. Now to add Firebase to our React app, we first need to create a Firebase project. To do that, we need first to go to firebase.google.com and then sign in using our Google account. And then once we are signed in, we can go and click on Go to Console button, or we can just go to this link here. So let's go and create our Firebase project. So I'll go to firebase.google.com and then I will need to sign in using my Google account. So I need to fill in my credentials, my password, and now I can go and click on Go to Console. Now I'm signed in. I can go and click on Go to Console. Now, if we already have projects, you will see your projects here, but because I don't have any projects here, I need to go and create a new project. So I'm going to click on Create a Project. I'm going to call this TODO app, maybe. And then I accept the Firebase terms. I need to not enable Google Analytics, we don't need that. And then create our project. This will take some time. Now I'm going to click on Continue. Now my TODO app is now created. My Firebase project is now created. Get started by adding Firebase to your app. So we are creating a web app. So I'm going to click on Web. I need to give a nickname to my app. I'm gonna call this TODO app as well. I don't want to set up Firebase hosting for now. I'm just gonna go and click on Register App. Once it's done, you need to add the SDK to your React project or to your project. Now I'm just gonna go and copy the whole thing. And now let's go and talk about this code first. So now we need to add Firebase SDKs and initialize Firebase. So we've got some scripts from our console. Now here, this is just a project using vanilla JavaScript. So you may need to take this code and paste it at the bottom before the body tag of your index.html file. But for us, we're not using vanilla JavaScript. We are using a Node.js. We are creating a Node.js app. So instead of getting the core Firebase JS SDK using a script tag, we're going to use the ECMAScript sex import. So to import Firebase from Firebase/app. So this line here is the same as this one here. Then they say here that you need to add the SDKs for Firebase products that you want to use. So in this case, we're going to use Firestore. So we need to import the SDKs for Firebase Firestore. So I'm going to go and import Firebase Firestore. And then we have our Firebase configuration. We're not going to change this, never change this. And then we're going to initialize our Firebase app. So I'm going to go and use the same line, Firebase.initialize app, Firebase config, this object here. And then I'm going to go and export default Firebase because I'm going to need Firebase in different places in my app. Now I'm going to put this inside an index.js and then inside the folder called Firebase. Now before running this code here, we need first to run npm install and install Firebase first. Now let's go and open our text editors and do this. First thing first, you need the files from the last part, the part 14. So you need to download the folder, copy it and go to downget and click on download. Now once you download the folder, go into that folder, run npm install, and then you're good to go. If you already have the files, go and open your text editor. So I'm gonna go and open my text editor, and then I'm gonna go and create a folder here. It's gonna be called Firebase. Then I'm gonna create an index.js. I'm gonna paste in the code from Firebase. We need to import Firebase from Firebase/app, which we didn't install yet. And then I'm gonna add the SDKs for my product Firestore. And then I'm gonna just remove the script tag and use const. And we still need to initialize app and then export default Firebase so I can use it anywhere I want. I'm gonna save this, and then I'm gonna open a terminal and then run npm install Firebase. So this will take some time to install, so I'm just gonna wait for it. So after this has done, let's go back to our Firebase console. So I'm gonna go and click on continue to console. Now we need Firestore to set up our Firestore database. So I'm gonna go and click on Cloud Firestore. The first thing we need to do is to create a database. So I'm gonna go and click on create database. They ask you if you want to start in production mode or in test mode. So we're gonna set this to test mode, and I'm gonna click on next. Use your Cloud Firestore or set your Cloud Firestore location. You can start the one that is nearest to you, and then click on enable. And once it's done, we can go and create a collection. So I'm gonna call this todos. Next, they will ask you to create a document. You can give it an auto ID and then a field. I'm gonna call this text. It's gonna be a string. I'm gonna say go for a run. This is actually our to do. Now before I continue, let's go and see what is a collection, which is a document, and what do I mean with a field. So what is a collection, a document, and a field? So you can think of a collection as a folder that contains a lot of documents, and the data is just some fields in that document. Now to understand this well, let's see an example here. So we have a collection called todos. You can think about the todos collection as an array in JavaScript. Our collection todos will have many documents. Each document is an object in our array todos. So our array todos has a lot of objects. Each object is going to be a to-do that the user added to our todos array. So each to-do here is a document in our collection. Now each to-do will have an ID, a text property, date, time, color, checked, and project name. These properties here of our to-do are just the fields of our document in our database. So now you can think about a collection as an array, a document as an object in that array, and all the fields of that document are just properties of that document. So remember, each document in our collection todos is a to-do. Now let's go back to our console and create a collection called todos and a collection called projects, and then add some documents there to start with. So now I'm gonna go and add some fields to my document here. So to our to-do, I'm gonna add a field called date. So I'm gonna hit save. Now you can see our to-dos. It has one to-do, one document, and some properties, which are the properties of our to-do. Now I'm gonna go and start a new collection called projects for our projects. I'm gonna hit next. I'm gonna set an auto ID to my document, which is just a project. So now our project is gonna be an array which has a lot of documents, a lot of projects. So I'm gonna call the field here name, and then it's gonna be personal. I'm gonna hit save. So I'm gonna go and add for my projects another project. So the project name here is gonna be work, and I'm gonna hit save. I'm gonna add another one, so it's gonna be name, and I'm gonna set it to other. So we have 3 projects: personal, work, and then other. And I have only one to do for now, and that's enough. Now let's go and get this data from our app and show it to the user. First, we need to go and update our context. So we've created a folder called text index.js, and this is how our code looks like so far. Now we've passed down these values here, the selected project and set selected project. Now we need to send down the to-dos and projects. The to-dos is an array, the same for projects. This contains all the to-dos and this contains all the projects. Now to get this to-dos and projects, we need to set up a subscription and get those from our database and then send them down. To get the to-dos, I'm going to use a function called useTodos, and to get the projects, we need to use a function called useProjects, and it takes in the to-dos. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So useTodos, useProjects starts with use, like our use state. So these are called custom hooks. So our useTodos and useProjects are called custom hooks. So before we use these, of course, we need to import them from a folder called hooks. So I will need a folder called hooks to my custom hooks. So let's go first and talk about what is a custom hook and when do you need a custom hook. So a custom hook is just a JavaScript function, not actually a regular JavaScript function, but at the end it's just a function. When do you need a JavaScript function? You need it when to reuse a piece of code or logic. So the same thing applies for custom hooks. So you need to create a custom hook when you need to reuse a piece of code or logic. What changes between a JavaScript function and a custom hook is just the name of the function. So the name of the function must start with the word use. So whenever someone is reading our code, when he sees that the function starts with use, he knows for sure that's a hook, and the rules of hooks applies to that function. So if you need to read about rules of hooks, you can go to React documentations. Now, one of the cases you would have to create a custom hook is when you need to set up a subscription and remember a value, which means using state. So whenever you need to create a subscription or set up a subscription and you need to set up some state to remember some values there, you can go and create a custom hook, which is our case exactly because we need to set up a subscription to get the to-dos and projects from our Firebase, and we still need to create some state for to-dos to remember the to-dos and the projects. Now we need 2 functions that starts with the word use. So the first one is going to be useTodos and the second one is going to be useProjects. UseProjects will take in a parameter to-dos. Why? Because we need to do some calculations there to know the number of to-dos for a given project. For the useTodos hook, it doesn't need any parameters. Now our useTodos and our useProjects needs to listen for any changes in our database. What I mean is whenever a to-do has been added to our database or a project has been renamed, or to-do has been removed, has been added, edited, anything happens in our database, we need to listen to those changes. So I always need to change my to-dos array and my projects array whenever something changes. So in this case, we need to listen for real-time updates. First, we're using Firebase, and then we have set up our Firestore. We've created a database, and we've started some collections there, to-dos and projects. And then we created some docs inside each of the collections. Now let's see, I need to listen for a specific doc inside my collection. In that case, I need to use Firebase, so we need to import that first. Then I'm gonna go and say Firestore, then .collection, then the collection is gonna be to-dos, and then my doc. So if you remember this sequence here, you won't get lost here. So Firebase, Firestore, a collection, and then your doc. This is the ID of your doc you want to listen to. Now to listen to this doc, you need to add an event called onSnapshot. So with onSnapshot listener, whenever something happens in your doc, any changes, this will fire up a function. This function takes in the doc, the changed doc. So after the doc has been changed, this onSnapshot will fire up a function, and that function take in as a parameter the doc itself or the updated doc. And then you can do whatever you want with your new data. So doc.data will just go and return an object with all the fields of your doc. So for example, in our case, when we have to-dos, when I say doc.data, this will return an object with a property called text, a property called date, day, time, etc. So all the properties inside an object. Now, this is how to listen for a doc changes. But for us, we need to listen for the whole collection changes. So in this case, we need to use Firebase, then Firestore, then our collection to-dos, and then we need to add an onSnapshot listener here. So whenever something happens in our collection, onSnapshot will fire up our function here. This function in this case will not take in a doc, it will take in a snapshot. And the snapshot here has a property called docs. So this is an array. So snapshot.docs is an array of all the docs inside of your collection. Now you can go and do whatever you want with this array here. You can use a for each method, you can use a map method, any method you can use on an array, you can use it here. So this is how you can listen to a collection changes. Now let's go and implement this in our use to-dos hook and our use project hook. So for our use to-dos hook, I'm gonna go and create a folder called hooks, then an index.js. This is where all my custom hooks will live. Now I'm gonna go and create a function called use to-dos. All what this function will do is at the end return a to-dos array. So this is the array to-dos that I'm gonna use to show the to-dos to the user. Now because I will need to remember these to-dos, I'm gonna go and create a state for my to-dos. And then I'm gonna initialize it with an empty array because the to-dos is gonna be an array. Now because I'm using state, I'm gonna need to import that from React. I'm not importing React because I'm not gonna render any JSX here. And now I'm gonna go and set up my subscription, and I'm gonna add an snapshot listener to my collection here. Now because I am setting up a subscription, remember this is a side effect, so we need to use our use effect hook, which means we need to import that from React as well. Now we are using Firebase, which means we need to import Firebase as well. Now I'm gonna go here and use my snapshot.docs, which is an array. I'm gonna use a map method on my docs, and then I'm gonna go and do some logic here for each doc inside my docs array. Now for the map method here, it's gonna return an array, and that array is gonna be just my to-dos, right? So I'm gonna call this data so I won't get confused. Now the data here is an array which is gonna be set to my to-dos at the end. Now the data is an array which has a lot of objects, and each object is just a to-do, a single to-do. So here I'm just gonna go and return an object. So inside my data we have a lot of elements, a lot of to-dos. Each to-do is an object. that to-do must have an ID, right? Which is going to be just the ID of my document. So when I say doc.id, I get this ID here, and I'm going to use this ID for my to-do. Now to get this fields here or this properties here, you need to say doc.data. Doc.data in that case is going to return an object with all these properties. Now because I need to add that object to this object here, I'm going to use a spread syntax or a spread operator, and then to spread my object here, because doc.data is just an object, and now my object here will have a property called id set to doc.id, a property called text set to go for run, a date property set to this date, etc. And now I'm gonna just use my set to-dos function here to set my to-dos to this data here, or just the array I've got from the database. Now because I set up a subscription here, I need to do some cleaning up, because if I don't, I will create a memory leak. So I need to do some cleaning up. To do a cleanup in your useEffect hook, you need to return a function to clean up. So this is called the cleanup function. Now all I'm gonna do here is call a function called unsubscribe. Where do I get this function here? This function is returned from this code here. So when you set up this subscription, this will return a function. I'm gonna call this unsubscribe. You can call this ABC and then call ABC, and that function will unsubscribe. I'm just gonna call this unsubscribe because that's its job. Now we're all good. The last thing I will do, because I want to use to-dos elsewhere, I'm gonna export this function. Now let's go and talk about our use projects. It's gonna be using the same logic. So I will go inside my index.js. Beside my function use to-dos, I'm going to create another function called use projects. I'm going to export that function. I need to use some state for my projects, and at the end I'm going to return those projects. Now I need to use effect because I'm going to set up a subscription, and I need to do some cleaning up. Now here the collection here is going to be projects. Now on snapshot, I'm going to go and use a map method on my snapshot.docs, and this will return an array. I'm going to set that to data and set projects to that data. Now my use project here needs to-dos. So our projects is an array of projects. Every project is an object. That's why I need to return an object, and that object has three properties: the ID, the name, and the number of to-dos. So the ID is going to be the doc.id, the name is going to be the project name, and the project name is going to be the doc.data.name. So the doc.data is going to return an object with all the properties of our document, all the fields of our document, and we have a field called name which has the name of the project. So saying doc.data.name will just return the name of the project. I'm going to set this to a constant called project name, and this will be the name of our project. Now for the number of to-dos, I need to do some calculations. So I'm going to go and create a function called calculate number of to-dos. This will need two parameters, project name and the to-dos. So I will need to go into my to-dos array that I received from my database. So I need to go into my array to-dos and search for all the to-dos that has a project name is the same as this project name here, and count them one by one. To do this, I'm going to go here and create my function, calculate number of to-dos. This will take in project name and my to-dos array. Now for my to-dos array, I'm going to use a filter method. The filter method returns an array, and that array is populated with elements where this condition here is true. So what this code means, so I'm going to go and filter all the to-dos inside my array where the to-do that project name is the same as my project name. So I'm going to go and filter out all the to-dos that has a project name which is the same as the project name I'm getting from my database. So this will return an array with all the to-dos that verify this condition, which means I just need to know the length of that array, and that's the number of to-dos. So I'm gonna go and say that length, and now this will return the number of to-dos. And that's it. So now let's go and implement this in our code and see if it works. So I will go and create a new folder called hooks for my custom hooks, an index.js file inside, and then I'm gonna import useState and useEffect from React, and then I will need to import Firebase from Firebase, our folder Firebase. Then here I will go and export a function called useTodos. This is our custom hooks to get the to-dos. I'm gonna create a state from my to-dos, then useEffect hook, because I'm gonna set up a subscription here. So I'm gonna call this unsubscribe, then Firebase.Firestore, then our collection to-dos. Then I'm gonna add an onSnapshot listener. So on snapshot, I'm gonna receive a snapshot. I'm gonna create a const called data. So snapshot.docs.map, for every doc, I'm gonna go and return an object. Its object properties are an ID, which is the doc ID, and I'm gonna spread my doc.data to get all the other fields or properties. Now I'm gonna set to-dos to with data to to-dos, and then I'm gonna return my to-dos. Now I'm gonna need to do some cleanup, so I need to use my function unsubscribe to unsubscribe. Now I need to copy this because it's gonna be the same logic for my use projects. So I'm just gonna change the names here. So this is gonna be projects. This is also gonna be projects. For the collection, it's called projects. And then here I will need to grab the name of the project first. doc.data.name. Name is the name of the field. Now here I need to return an object with an ID, a name, and then the number of to-dos. I'm gonna use a function to calculate the number of to-dos, which needs two parameters, the project name and the to-dos. So let's go and create our function. First, use project needs to take in to-dos as a parameter. Now the function here will return the to-dos that filter. So I'm going to filter out all the to-dos that has the same name or the project name as the name of the project where we're getting from the database. And then I'm going to return the length of that array to calculate the number of to-dos. Now this must be projects, and I should take it outside of the map method. The same here, I need to take it outside of the map method. Now I'm gonna return here the projects. Now I will need to go and use my hooks from my context. So I need to bring in my hooks first. So I'm gonna import useTodos and use projects from my folder hooks. And then here I need to use my hooks. So to-dos is going to be equal to use to-dos, and then projects is going to be equal to use projects, and this will take in to-dos as a parameter. And then I'm going to send this down, the to-dos and the project. Now if I save, you can see we have a typo there, so I'm not gonna say Firebase or Firebase. So I'm gonna go to Firebase, I'm gonna remove that, and it should work. That's good. Now let's go and use the data. So the component that will use the data we get from the Firebase are first the projects. So here instead of saying projects, we need to import that using context. So I'm going to add a comment that says context. So equals to use context, and then I'm going to pass in our context to do context. Now let's bring in our to do context first from the folder called context. Now if I save, I cannot see the projects there. Let's go now and get the to-dos from our context. So I'm just gonna use say to-dos here, and you can see our to-do is there. I don't see the project name, so I'm gonna go to my to-do. So here I should say project name. That's the name of the property. Now you can see the name of our project. Now if I go here, you could see that we had a typo there for our collection. It says projects, it's not projects. So I need to remove that collection and create a new one with the right name. So I'm gonna go and create a new collection called projects. Next, then I will add a project called, the name of the project is gonna be personal. So I'm gonna minimize the window so you can see that we are really listening to our database. So if I hit save, my app should refresh, and you can see that personal shows there. Now if I go and add a new document, let's call this work. This must show up in our app. That's good. Let's go add a final project called other. Hit save, and we can see our project there. Now let's go to our collection to-dos, and I'm gonna go change checked from false to true, save. Now you can see that our to-do has been checked. And that's it for today. I hope you learned something in this part. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Take care.